Welcome everyone to the fourth Lancaster International Fiction Lecture, which this year will be given by Guadelupe Nettel. Originally written in Spanish, it has been translated into English by her regular translator, Rosalind Harvey. Our moderator this evening will be Dr. Sam O'Donoghue, who is the co-convener of the LitFest International Fiction Book Club and a lecturer in Spanish at Lancaster University. The Lancaster International Fiction Lecture is a collaboration between the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences at Lancaster University and LitFest, Lancaster's Literature Festival. The inaugural lecture was given in 2021 by Juan Gabriel Vasquez, and subsequent speakers have been Gitanjali Shri from India and Georgi Gospodinov from Bulgaria. Fiction is an art form shared by almost all languages. And right now, English language readers are more aware than ever of the extraordinary fiction that is being written everywhere and in all languages throughout the world, thanks to translators and publishers. For this reason, it seemed to us that an annual lecture to celebrate and discuss fiction as an international art form was needed more than ever. Guadelupe will speak for about 20 to 25 minutes, and then Sam O'Donoghue will hold a conversation with her for about 10 or 15 minutes, and then he will take questions from the audience. A word about Guadelupe Nettel and her translator. Guadelupe was born in Mexico and grew up between Mexico and France. She is the author of the international award-winning novels Huésped, The Guest, The Body Where I Was Born, After the Winter, which won the 2014 Heraldi Novel Prize, and Still Born, which came out in 2023, I think that's right in English, and also 3 collections of short stories, including The Strange and Wonderful Pétalos, which I first read in 2008 or so. Extraordinary to think it's that long ago. They're all published by Anagrama, which is the most prestigious of all Spanish language publishing houses. In 2025, Fitzcarraldo will publish her latest collection of stories, The Accidentals. Her work has been translated into more than 15 languages and has appeared in publications such as Granta, The White Review, El País, the New York Times, and La Repubblica and La Stampa in Italy. She lives in Mexico City, where until recently she was director of the magazine Revista de la Universidad de Mexico, and is currently on a writing fellowship in Paris. Her translator, Rosalind Harvey, who translated tonight's lecture, is a literary translator and educator from Bristol and now based in Coventry in the West Midlands. She has translated writers such as Juan Pablo Villalobos, Elvira Navarro, Alberto Barrera Sica, and Enrique Villamatas, and her work has been shortlisted for the Guardian First Book Award and the Oxford Weidenfeld Translation Prize. And the last thing to say is that her translation of Stillborn was shortlisted for the 2023 Booker International Fiction Prize. So, without more ado, Guadelupe, if you are ready, the floor is yours.
Okay, so I start reading. The title of the text is The Alchemy of Literature, a lecture on pain. How beautiful and enigmatic is the image of the alchemist, who Marguerite Yourcenar and Umberto Eco portrayed as individuals devoted to the task of transforming base metals into gold, namely that which is ugly, heavy, poisonous even, that which is used to make guns and shackles, into the metal more prized by human beings, the most luminous, the one that represents the brilliance of the sun. All things considered, this was not such a fanciful enterprise. There are many examples in nature of transmutations such as the one the alchemist sought. Mushrooms, for instance, transform rotting stuff into nourishment and purify the earth's toxicity. Trees and plants in general convert the carbon dioxide produced by cars into oxygen. The oysters clean the impurities from water. Literature, and I would venture to say art in general, transforms the innumerable pains that human experience entails into beauty. The beauty that exists in Lorenzo Bartolini's sculpture, The Inconsolable, in the Song of Songs, in Don Quixote de la Mancha, in the verses of A Season in Hell. But what exactly is this material we are attempting to transform? What is this thing we refer to with the word pain, despite the fact it takes so many different forms? Or is it worth even considering? Let us begin with physical pain. This is very difficult to represent. In general, we lack the words to speak of this experience. We tend to speak of a dull or an acute pain, a muted pain, one that throbs or shoots, a pain that cripples, or one that lies in wait. We speak of a twitch, of a burning, of an irritation on the skin. We scarcely know how to indicate the place where it starts, the arm, the head, the belly, but the truth is, we writers lack the vocabulary just as the sick do when trying to explain to the doctors how they feel. And so, in poetry as in novels, there are very few detailed descriptions of this phenomenon. Joan Didion, who suffered from migraines from childhood, tallies up the visible and invisible symptoms of her torment in a powerful essay entitled In Bed. The actual headache, when it comes, brings with it chills, sweating, nausea, and a debility that seems to stretch the very limits of endurance, she says. The Mexican Maria Luisa Puga, too, in her Diary of Pain, makes an uncommon effort to express the constant inflammation in her joints because her rheumatoid arthritis. For Puga, her pain is a companion that possesses a well-defined personality as well as a particular appearance. It is unctuous, skinny, dark, and always on the prowl. The Spanish writer Maria Sanz says in her novel Clavicle, I describe the umpteenth doctor the precise place where my pain is, an inexplicable space between my breastbone and my throat. The doctor says, that's impossible. Insistently, I point at a small hollow. I trace circles around it with my index finger. It is a blank space in things, the only region of my body mass where there is absolutely nothing. The doctor crosses a line. If I were to stick a needle in exactly this spot, I would come out clean on the other side. There are many pains afflicting Sanz: public health and its problems, capitalism, the indifference of doctors, work, guilt, fear of old age and decrepitude, and writing too, which at times provides company and other refuses to. All of these are concentrated onto an imprecise point on her slender collarbone. Didion, Puga, and Sanz make one thing clear. There are few experiences as isolating as pain, because no matter the effort we make, it is practically impossible for our interlocutor to understand or imagine what we are undergoing. What's more, it is difficult to find someone, whether it be a reader, a relative, or a friend, with a disposition to imagine our sensations. Great openness and great empathy are required in order to willingly accept another's pain. We already have plenty with our own. This is why most of the time we do not even bother to imagine it. Our psychological defense mechanism prevents us from doing so. In contrast, there is another type of suffering which is less arduous to open ourselves up to, the type we tend to call emotional pain, moral pain, or psychic pain. And not only has this been addressed countless times by those who dedicate themselves to literature, but it is also one of the great driving forces of art, one of its main ingredients or raw materials. More than 20 years ago, when I was first starting to write and didn't yet have much of an idea as to what my subjects would be, I read at the recommendation of a friend, The Unquiet Grave by Cyril Connolly. There I came across a quotation in Pali, which the author translates thus: "Sorrow is everywhere. In man is no abiding entity. In things is no abiding reality." Connolly attributes the phrase to the Buddha and adds, a dirge that still resounds mournfully in 10,000 monasteries. The quote intrigued me so much, I decided to investigate this philosophy further. And this was how I discovered that it is focused on nothing less than the elimination of suffering. When the Buddha reaches enlightenment and decides to teach others how to do so, he gathers together a group of people in the city of Sarnath. This is where he lays down the foundations of his doctrine, known as the Four Noble Truths. The first of these is suffering exists and is all-pervading. The suffering or pain that Buddhism speaks of, the word in Sanskrit is dukkha, is divided into various categories. The first corresponds to physical and existential pain intrinsic to the human condition, the almost incommunicable pain I mentioned at the beginning. The second corresponds to a reaction to change or loss, whether of things, situations, and people, or faculties and possibilities to which we are attached. That is the suffering caused by the fleeting nature of things, of bonds, of experiences. It is a pain experienced by the teenagers Romeo and Juliet. It is Odysseus' nostalgia when he recalls Ithaca. But it is also a subject we find in the most modern novels like The Great Gatsby by F. Scott Fitzgerald, or Battles in the Desert, the best-known novel by the Mexican José Emilio Pacheco, where he painstakingly enumerates all the streets, cinemas, cars, adverts, and radio programs that people his childhood in Mexico City during the 50s. After recalling all of this, and chiefly after recalling his first love, Pacheco ends this brief moving novel with these words: "So ancient, so remote, such an impossible story. But Mariana existed, Jim existed, everything existed that I've repeated to myself after such a long time, refusing to confront it. I'll never know if the suicide was true. I never again saw Rosales or anybody else from that era. They demolished the school. They demolished Mariana building. They demolished my house. And they demolished Colonia Roma. That city ended. That country is finished. There is no memory of the Mexico of those years, and nobody cares. Who could feel nostalgia for that horror?" One senses in this right comment, with which he ends the book, that feeling of solitude and isolation that sweeps over older people when they recall their youth, and which Pacheco also broached in several of his poems. Few Spanish-speaking writers have described as well as he the awareness of what the Buddhists call impermanence, and which is none other than tempus fugit, that is, the transitory nature of life and the pain caused by not being able to come to terms with its speed. The third variant of dukkha, which Buddhism refers to, describes a very subtle, profound type of suffering, a dissatisfaction that comes with existence itself and which can be glimpsed in the question about the meaning of life, to be or not to be of Hamlet, or the aphorisms that Émile Cioran compiles under the intriguing title of The Trouble with Being Born. Another of Buddhism's premises is that except for physical pain, all suffering originates in the mind due to attachment, aversion, and the mistaken ideas that we can have about who we are. Trying to reject or ignore suffering only makes it more powerful, but so too does the habit of growing too fond of it. Although a writer's work is inspired in a large part by experiences and careful observation of the world and our fellow human beings, it is equally inspired by books written by others. The many authors who have helped me to look at pain head-on, and it would take me far too long to mention all of them here. Andrea Baiani is one of them. His book, If You Kept a Record of Sins, tells of the profound sadness and loneliness experienced by the little boy abandoned by his mother, while Do You Recognize Me speaks of the death of his best friend and mentor, the writer Antonio Tabucchi. Another of Baiani's novels, written in the form of a fable and entitled A Good in the World, opens like this. Once upon a time, there was a little boy who had a pain which never left him. He carried it with him everywhere. He crossed the fields in the mornings to go to school. When he was in the classroom, the pain could curl up at his feet and for 5 hours stayed there, its eyes closed, no breathing. At break time, it went out with the boy and his classmates to the playground. And when the school day finished, the boy crossed the field on the way back home with the pain by his side. It didn't need a lead because it would never have escaped. And nor did it need a muzzle because it would never have hurt anyone. The writers we read because they seem likable, funny, interesting, and they're writers we read as we converse with that was part of ourselves, which we'd hardly ever come into contact. In this second group, I place the French writer Emmanuel Carrère. I began to read his novel Other Lives But Mine without knowing what it was about. My father had just been diagnosed with terminal bladder cancer, and reading was one of the ways I used to distract myself from the anticipatory grief, almost as excruciating and far more distressing than real grief. The story seemed to be clear. The narrator was in Sri Lanka at the time of the tsunami. You didn't need to make much effort to get lost in the plot of this novel. Nevertheless, shortly afterwards, Carrère went back to France and the story changed completely. The subject was no longer the tsunami, but rather the agony of those who spend their lives accompanying a loved one who is sick with cancer. That is, the book spoke of exactly what was happening to me, of the thing I was attempting to distract myself from. Despite what one might think, rather than deepening my anguish, submerging myself in the story of Juliette and Etienne the judge, of their friendship based on the experience of illness, of physically suffering, and of imminent death, helped me to understand what was happening to me, but helped me particularly to stop focusing on so much on my own suffering and to focus instead on that of my father, on what he was feeling, on his own distress, on his rage, on the story that had led him to this point. In this book, several writers are mentioned, and two of them stayed with me. Fritz Zorn and his novel Mars, the only book by this Swiss author in which he speaks of cancer, of his own cancer, as the culmination of a family and a personal history, but above all, as the consequence of never having allowed himself to express his anger. The other is a psychoanalyst Pierre Cazenave, whose essays on illness as a method of self-knowledge lead my way in my attempts to understand what my father was going through. Emmanuel Carrère quotes a passage from Louis Ferdinand Céline's Journey to the End of the Night that sums up his novel thesis most eloquently. It reads as follows: maybe that's what we seek our whole lives long, nothing more, the greatest possible sorrow, so that we can become ourselves before we die. The death of my father, above all, but also that of other much beloved people, taught me that in the moments of the greatest pain, the neurotic carapace we tend to barricade ourselves behind disappears, or at least develops cracks. And this gives us the opportunity to establish an intimate contact with others, an exceptional contact. This discovery gave rise to my novel After the Winter, in which 4 characters go through moments of devastating loss, while at the same time discovering the possibility of encountering the other. If in Buddhism the masters teach through their way of being in the world and how they are, one learns by watching them, by the fact of being in their company. In the case of writers, this transmission takes place via their books. The thing they transmit is their own perception of the world. What is that Carrère has taught me to see? Other people, first and foremost, to look at them as he describes them in his books, with empathy, with curiosity, with a desire to understand even the most disturbed and cruel of human beings. I agree with Amos Oz when he says that to read a novel is like being invited into other people's living rooms, their nurseries, their studies, and even their bedrooms. You are invited into their secret sorrows, into their family joys, into their dreams. Although we might belong to different cultures or different moments in time, human beings are not so different from one another. Literature is a highly subtle code which manages to open, if only for a moment, the most closed of hearts and minds. It has the power to connect us beyond ideologies, with our most basic emotions such as fear, humiliation, tenderness, suffering, and the compassion that can arise from this. It has the power to nudge us into the intimate sphere of other people and other communities, even enemy communities, as Oz suggests, to make us share with them their story, their daily lives, their fears, their desires, their perspectives, their experiences, and especially their pain. It seems to me that one of the most remarkable qualities of fiction is that it allows us access to subjectivity like no other art form. Human beings have a highly intimate relationship with words, with thinking words, with dreaming words. Words, when well chosen, can allow us to construct images, to express emotions, to name things and describe those things which cannot be named. There are times when books are not only a window, as us would have it, but rather are indisputably a portal or a time machine that transport us to other realities, that take us not only into the house, but also the body and mind of other people, real or imaginary. In short, they allow us to be others. I, for example, was Gregor Samsa. I was the austere Bernarda Alba, and I was each one of her daughters. I was the son of Pedro Páramo. I was Annie Ernaux and felt her peasant girl shame in the classist word of the university. And I felt the desire of Humbert Humbert towards the 14-year-old girl, and that of Carmen Maria Machado for a badly behaved Harvard graduate. I was Jean-Claude Roman, and I knew I had no option but to kill my entire family before they discovered my despicable behavior. Thanks to Gael Faye, I felt the agony of the persecution of the Tutsi by the Hutu during the genocide in Rwanda and Burundi. Books allow us to reincarnate. Because what is reincarnation if not live again in another body, in other circumstances, and another time? In books, the memory of humanity is printed. Like the characters in Our Share of Night by Mariana Enriquez, humans continue to dream of cheating death, of somehow remaining in this ephemeral world, of transferring our consciousness, another of the ambitions attributed to the alchemists. We forget that when writing was invented, we discovered the secret of immortality. This is how we transfer our consciousness into other bodies, and also the most common, simple, quotidian way of communicating with the dead, one that requires no sacrifice in exchange. It is enough to devote a few hours of our time and attention to them to receive the experience, wisdom, and advice of those who lived before us in this world. It does not matter if they did so in the last century, in the Renaissance, or in ancient Egypt. Books preserve the history, the wisdom, the incantations of the sorcery of our ancestors. Is that not a feat of magic more powerful and indisputable even than that which the alchemists sought? I shall take the liberty of including one little postscript. Why do you think that even now, in the 21st century, books are being banned? They're banned because they're liberate, because they open minds, because they can generate enough empathy to make us break with imposed loyalties such as that of the army, nationalism, or racism. They're banned because they make us free and because they incite us to subversion. In other words, books are powerful, and to some people, this power represents a threat. The books that I have mentioned here are not always easy to read. Often, when I recommend them to my students or my friends, they say, "Oof, that's the last thing I need to read now. Can't you recommend something that will make me laugh?" And then I recall Woody Allen's mathematical formula. Comedy is tragedy plus time. I think he was spot on. Why do we laugh when we recall the misfortunes from our past? Precisely because it is possible to transcend pain, but in order to do so, we must go through it. Often the perspective provided by the passage of the years allows us to see that, consciously or unconsciously, we chose this suffering because the experience of pain has a few important advantages. It allows us, on the one hand, to truly connect with others, to feel with the other. To feel with the other is the etymological sense of compassion. That word that originally had nothing to do with looking at pityingly or patronizingly. On the other hand, pain is an uncomfortable yet highly effective way of learning. Neurologists and psychologists know this perfectly well. And I'm not referring only to the pragmatic Ivan Pavlov, who, when he inflicted pain on the animals in his laboratory, managed to increase their intelligence, but also to Carl Gustav Jung, the father of analytical psychology. To conclude, I would like to quote a sentence from his book, Psychology and Alchemy, which will, I hope, return to readers the desire to read challenging stories. People will do anything, no matter how absurd, in order to avoid facing their own soul. one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Thank you.
Thank you, Guadalupe, for that fascinating meditation on literature, on pain, literature as alchemy. There were so many ideas in your lecture. It's just really got me thinking. So I just wanted to start by talking a bit more about pain and language with you. I mean, I suppose pain, in a sense, and this was an idea that you began to talk about. I think that pain can really be approached only through metaphor. Those kinds of pain, when we talk about it, we often use metaphors of weapons, don't we? And the kind of piercing or the clanging, the clashing, this kind of externalization of pain. So it seems to me that it can only really be approached through figurative language. And that's the only way of making intelligible that which, otherwise can't be communicated. So I'm wondering then, is that related to this idea of literature as playing a particularly important role in sensitizing people to other people's pain? And this was an idea that in the book that we were discussing as part of the book club yesterday, in your book Stillborn, you have the you have these characters who have to confront the medical establishment. They have to explain what they're feeling. It was an idea that you just discussed right now in the work of Marta Sanz. You talked about Santh's struggle to convince the medical establishment of her pain, the reality of that pain, and to communicate it. What do you see as being the particular, the role of literature in all this? Why is literature so important then or does it have a role to play in the medical establishment, maybe in getting medical professionals to be more aware of patients' pain and the reality of that pain?
Okay, thank you for this so interesting question. Actually, I've been wondering that for many years. And you know what? After the publication of Stillborn, some doctors, actually the doctors who were taking care of Inez, the little girl that appears in the book, in which the Inez, the character, is inspired, were reading the book, and they were reflecting on all that Inez's parents went through. And so they comment that to Inez's mother in reality, in the real world. And they had a dialogue with after the reading, and they said they could feel much more empathy after reading that. So I was very happy about the publication of this book, because at least a few doctors were reflecting on how to become more empathic with their patients.
It's a really fascinating example. And I mean, I suppose something else that you were discussing in your lecture right now is, the ability of literature also. So when, as readers, as a way of exercising pain, I guess literature has this fantastic ability. You talked about, the experience of your father, that grief, anticipatory grief, I think you called it, that anticipation of future pain, and how, I guess, the process of reading sensitized you to your father's experience and was a way of maybe exercising that pain that you felt.
Yes, it's strange, because I'm sure that all the readers had that same experience at some point of their life. It's almost magical, like when you're going through a challenging period of your life, suddenly you encounter in literature a book or novel that is exactly about what you're going through. And I'm sure it happened to you. Is it true?
It's definitely happened to me. Yeah. I can think of all sorts of occasions. You recognize yourself in the characters you read, don't you? I love that bit when you talked about the different characters that you've been over time. That you have been Pedro Paramo's son, or you have been Humbert. Humbert was another example that you gave. And I think that's the great power of literature, isn't it? That ability that it gives us to see the world through another's eyes or explore other subjectivities, as you put it.
Yeah, but when you encounter exactly the book where the narrator is going through a very similar experience, it's like not even talking to your best friend, it's talking to another yourself, an avatar you have in another time and in another country, probably, that went through exactly what you are facing in this very moment. So it's like somebody commenting on what you're living. So it's, for me, it's really magical. It happened the first time it happened to me. I was 11 years old. I was living with my grandmother, and I had a very, very difficult time because we have, like in our relationship was very hard, confronting, and I was beginning the adolescence, and she was not at all patient. She was expecting me to be very obedient towards her and to behave the way she wanted me to, in many ways. And so she was very strict. And I just by chance, let's call it, went and looked for a book to read in my mother's shelves. And I found Gabriel Garcia Marquez, La Cándida Heréndira, and her evil grandmother. I don't know the exact title in English,
Mm-hmm.
but that would translate like this. And I felt that, this very character of Heréndira was going through the same feelings I was facing, but in a worse circumstances. And I said, how is it possible that an old Colombian mister understands exactly what I'm going through? And from that moment on, I thought that literature writing was actually an act of magic. And I decided, to commit myself at least as a reader to literature. I was in love with literature because I thought this is something that no other art form can do.
I love that metaphor as well of literature as magic, literature as alchemy. It transmutes something from a base substance into something of beauty, something that, the ethereal. It reminds me actually of a philosophical debate about I think the title, the kind of topic of the debate is the paradox of tragedy. I mean, it seeks to explain why spectators enjoy tragedy, why they pay money to go to plays and witness the kinds of events that you would never want to happen in your own life. And if they happen in your own life, you'd be weeping. And yet we pay good money to watch a tragedy and to relive these kinds of things. What is it about that what compels us to do this? What attracts us to tragedy as spectators? And I think you really get to the nub of that question in your lecture as well.
Yeah, you exercise definitely, and also you transform it into something beautiful, into something meaningful, into wisdom sometimes. So, or at least knowledge, something. And that is beautiful. It's great that we have a way to do that. And everyone can do that by reading, by encountering the right book at the right moment.
Yeah. I'll just take this moment to remind our audience that there's time for their questions. So I'd encourage them to pop a question. You can actually click on the Ask a Question button next to the chat function, and you can add your question there to the box, and I can then put your questions to Guadalupe. So please do contribute your questions as well. I just wanted to come back to another idea that you discussed towards the end of your lecture. So you talked about the burning of books in the 21st century, and that this is an indication of the immense power that books have. That people continue to fear books. We know about burnings of books by the Spanish Inquisition. It does seem to be of a different time, doesn't it? It seems to be something that we should have consigned to the dustbin of history, the burning of books. I was just wondering if you could perhaps talk a bit more about the kinds of books that you feel are under attack today, or are there any examples perhaps from I don't know, your part of the world, elsewhere, where books are under threat and their power is feared?
Sure. First of all, I'm thinking about Brazil's under Bolsonaro, during this kind of it was not a dictature, but it was very totalitarian. And how police came into the book fair of Sao Paulo and started to pick up all the novels that could mention homosexuality. Imagine that, 21st century. And they just take them out from the book fair, all of them, all that were in a list. And what did they do with them? Probably they burned them or they hid them. We don't know, but it's exactly the same effect, actually, just, So that's one example. Another example is Iran, for sure, where you can, they took out from bookstores and also libraries books that they considered dangerous because they spoke about women's liberty or women's freedom at some point, or were describing how the world was when women were free. Another example is, like censorship. The other day I received an offer to translate Stillborn into Arabic, and the scout asked me if I agreed with taking out the part of the lesbian encounter between Laura and Doris. And of course I said no way, but also it happened in China with Martín Caparrós' El Hambre, The Hunger, which is an amazing book where he speaks about the horror of hunger, you say, people starving actually nowadays in the world, and how this is absolutely unnecessary and absolutely, it would be very easy to arrange. And there is a part, a very strong, a very challenging part where he speaks about China today. And when they translated it, they wanted to take this part apart. And actually, I think they did. They did just cut it. And the last but not least idea that I have is this cancellation politics that we are facing nowadays. There's a new way of burning either people or books, to say, in the mass media, this book is absolutely against all, this and this value, or also it is, politically incorrect or whatever. They can accuse a book of being whatever, and people would not read it anymore, or they would, ask the publisher to edit it because of this and that. And I've heard many writers saying that they were scared, like writers could be scared during the Franco dictatorship or during, another whatever totalitarian period of history. It is another way of burning books.
Yeah. There's some really troubling examples that you've given. I mean, I think we forget sometimes that fiction is also, sometimes reading fiction is meant to be uncomfortable. It's meant to put us into places of discomfort, which you alluded to again with your account of reading Lolita, for instance, Nabokov's Lolita. It's the kind of experience that you feel afterwards, like you kind of want to have a shower afterwards. It's like, oh, I'm inside this warped mindset. It's not meant to be pleasant.
No, of course not. And sometimes you can be in the skin or the body of someone really, I don't know how to say it, despicable or horrible, but it's good at the same time that we can do that. I don't think it's dangerous. I think it's even, you can be more aware of what kind of people are in this world.
Well, I'm just going to turn. I see we've got a couple of questions in the Q&A, so I'm going to pick up on those questions now. So the first one I can see is from Valerie Mortimer, who has asked the following: do you feel that you're involved in a dangerous enterprise?
I like the question. I think living is dangerous already. I would just say that. Writing it is. Writing is as well, for sure.
Okay. And a second question, this one's from Monique, who asked the following: what trends do you see emerging in literature, and how do you think they will shape the future of fiction?
Wow. That's a difficult question. I don't think I'm able to answer that immediately. I will think about it, and maybe later an answer will come.
Okay, sure. I'm wondering if maybe we could narrow it down by talking about Mexican fiction, perhaps. I don't know that. It's just an idea, though.
Sure. There is, many women writers are nowadays publishing in Spanish, not only in Mexican literature, also in Colombia, in Argentina, and Chile, and Brazil. And they're very powerful writers. And they not only speaking about, like female problems or issues that we could face, like violence or, inequality in our continent, but also about many other, like many of them are very dark. Some of them are very brutal. Like I would mention those that I really, really, really like, which are Mariana Enriquez for sure, and also Fernanda Melchor, who is from Mexico, and Lina Meruane. And all of them are very different from each other. They're not like in a trend. I wouldn't say that, but for sure they have some common characteristics, like this being very, very direct and sometimes brutal, as I said.
Yes, we read as part of the International Fiction Book Club, Fernanda Melchor's Temporada de Huracanes. Is it hurricane season in English, which was a disturbing read. It was really, again, one of these works of fiction that forces you to inhabit subjectivities that are really quite unpleasant at times, but it tackles some really important topics. And I mean, I found it a really really exciting work of fiction, compelling and enjoyable ultimately as well.
Yes, absolutely. And also there is another Mexican writer I'm thinking about. She's more like a linguistic and essayist. She's not into fiction, but she is worth reading it. Yasnaya Aguilar Gil is the name of her. She's an indigenous writer, and she is opening our eyes to her world and her culture. And not only that, but also the many ways in which we Mexicans, even if we think we are very, very progressive people, are being, like classist and racist against this culture that lives in Mexico with us. And so I feel very grateful to her and very admirative as well.
Okay. So I can't see any other questions in the Q&A box. So just another call out there. If people want to put their questions in there, please do go ahead. But I'm going to get in there with one of my own questions in the meantime. So you spoke about your novel After the Winter in your lecture, and you talked about this discovery of a connection between, so the characters discovering a kind of connection they forged through devastating loss. I was just wondering if you could tell us a bit more about the novel and that process of discovering a connection with others through loss.
Yeah. Okay, that novel speaks about the experience of migrants. There is a female character, a female narrator called Cecilia, who is Mexican and left Mexico to live in France. And there's another narrator who is Cuban, a male Cuban, who left La Habana to live in New York. So both of them, without knowing each other, are facing, like similar circumstances, living in a Latin American country with all that it implies, poverty for sure, but also a lot of connection between people and, very warm relationships, even warmer for sure than New York or Paris. And then discovering the winter as, the season, because there's no winter either in Mexico, in Oaxaca at least, and not a proper winter in La Habana, and suddenly discovering, these very low temperatures, and also the kind of isolation or solitude you can face in those countries. And so it speaks about that mostly. And so, where they're really, really facing solitude and isolation, they're feeling really, really apart from the rest of people, that suddenly they have to face loss, like a very close person for them is dying, in the case of, especially in the case of Cecilia. And for Claudio, who is a Cuban narrator, he has an accident where he loses a part of his body, and he has to face this kind of loss. So they at this very moment of tremendous fragility or vulnerability, they start unexpectedly encountering other people and having, discovering friendship.
And I guess that theme of loss is also central to Stillborn.
It is.
Isn't it? It's so in that novel, Aurelio and Alina are preparing themselves throughout much of the novel for the future loss of their child, so their unborn child that they expect to lose as soon as it's born, and they begin the preparations for that loss before the arrival of the child.
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely. It's part of, I mean, it's at least it's the first part of the novel, this anticipatory loss.
Anticipatory loss, yeah.
And they receive that diagnosis, and they have to, they have to accommodate, they have to imagine themselves in that position, in those circumstances, and try to resignate. So it's very difficult, and they're trying to do so, but later on different things happen.
They do indeed. Yeah, we won't include any spoilers for our audience in case they wish to read Stillborn. I also discovered on reading Stillborn as well. I discovered the role of the thanatologa, which I'd never heard of before. I'd never heard of a thanatologo or someone who specialized in thanatologia. So that was interesting for me that this was a I don't know if it was because I was reading it in the Spanish and maybe the English translation would be slightly clearer for me, but I imagine it's a kind of grief counselor or
Exactly.
something along
That's
those
what
lines.
it is, the grief counselor.
Okay. And that's so that's who they visit to prepare for this, to prepare for the loss of their child. Okay, I'm just having a quick look just to see if there are any final questions that people wanted to ask in the chat. I can see there are some comments. And Rosalind's just confirming that it is indeed grief counselor. So in Peninsular Spanish, I've never heard of a tanatologa before. It was I don't know what they, I guess it's a kind of psicóloga, but I'm not sure what the exact role would be, but that was.
It's funny that you mentioned that because Rosalind was also very intrigued by that term as well.
And I can see that. So just a couple of comments in the chat. So Sally Walker has mentioned a similar trend. I think this is in reference to your comments about Mexican fiction and some of the trends in recent Mexican fiction about Japan. So she gives the example of Butter by Asako Yuzuki. I hope I'm saying that right. On the identity of women and violence too. Mm-hmm. And Rosalind has also made a comment in reference to the destruction, the burning of books. Books are being destroyed in their thousands, possibly millions, in all the libraries and universities currently being bombed in Gaza. A very sad reminder of events there as well. Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, all that remains really for me, Guadalupe, is to thank you for your fantastic lecture. It's been a pleasure having you as our lecturer for the Lancaster International Fiction Lecture in 2024. And it's been a pleasure. It's been a fascinating discussion as well for me. Thank you so much. I'll hand back over to Bill now.
Well, thank you, Guadalupe. Thank you, Sam. And thank you to Rosalind for the translation of the lecture and translating Guadalupe's other books. The only thing left for me to say is if you like what LitFest is doing with its lecture and with the International Fiction Book Club, please go to our website where you'll find out how you can support us financially, because we are not in regular receipt of statutory funds. We have to go out and raise the money each year for what we do. So donations are extremely welcome, and we have a friends scheme where you can support for a small amount of money each month. You can support us on a regular basis. So if you would do that, we would all be very grateful. But let me end by saying it's always so much more difficult online to sort of have a rousing round of applause. But please give a warm digital thank you to Guadalupe Nettel for a really terrific lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.